legitimate, I don't know, politically viable, I guess, is that they have to sort of take on this dominant, almost male persona. Do you know what I mean?
No, I totally
agree. She has to desexualize herself.
Yeah.
I think we should really question it, like, who are these observations and these conditions coming from? It's coming from a system that's it's set up by males. I mean, honestly, why do we as women have to fulfill, and I talk about Palin, I mean, they've really, what media would ever ask a male candidate, do you think you can really fulfill your role as both father and a politician? Like, it's disgraceful. And, and she has this politicized sex appeal that we've seen. And these are real conditions, but that's what I'm saying. Like, we need to stop, and I don't have the answer of how to, but what we're doing is we're doing this binary, like, you're either hard-nosed and male and aggressive to fit in the system, or you're docile and a woman and you're pretty and you're kind of like the feminized version. Like, why do we have to collapse into this really awful argument?
Yes.
Of
what about
binaries?
Gandhi? I want to pose this question in politics, because Gandhi certainly strikes me as a feminine type of politician. De Gaulle strikes me as a feminine type of writer, although he was very handsome and masculine, much more handsome than Gandhi, in my opinion. But Gandhi was very charming. And not really aggressive in that way. He would be very attentive. He sat on the floor, cross-legged, with a desk in front of him, and he would write down everything people said. He really was a good listener, and he didn't say very much, but I think his very personality exuded authority. Well, I don't know about female politicians, but, I do know of female politicians because they are the ones who politicized me. And they certainly exuded a lot of authority, and they were not male types. I mean, they wore saris, and they were certainly very fiery when they wanted to be, like the goddess Durga, or even the goddess Kali, who are symbolizations of power. But they clearly did not let go of their feminine sides, even in public. So I wonder if there is something for the first world to learn here from third world women.
Yeah.
And men, like Gandhi.
Well, that's the thing that actually gender theory starts to talk about, is the fact that women have made it definitely far within, like, being able to work in a male sphere and wear male clothes, but how far have men made it in order? And I know that it's like, why would a male ever wear a dress? But really it is, if you start to think about how it's set up, men do have a lot more of pressure on not to be feminine, but we have a lot of pressure to be masculine in the public sphere, and that's what I find very distasteful.
Even in classrooms, that is true, I think.
Yeah.
That is something that bothers me enormously, because that's the context in which I'm working. But I see it in conferences also, and I see this in any kind of public setting that is professional, so to speak. Yeah, there is, I think, a lot of pressure on women to present themselves in a certain way. Actually, I was quite shocked. One of my female colleagues here, I will not name her, she was saying that she was told that if you go to a party which is professional, you should not really have any alcoholic drink until you have talked to maybe 10 people or 15 even. That number struck me as being ludicrously large, and it would be amusing, except that she seemed very serious. And then I thought how tragic it is that you can't just go to a party and get a little tipsy and just have fun. You have to actually be on your guard.
Is that somehow is that specific for women? I mean,
That's,
somehow the harness their wildness?
she was saying it in general, but nobody has ever said that to me.
That's weird.
Or my friends, my male friends, or female friends.
Yeah.
But I'm reporting a real incident here. I'm not making this up. It happened right here downstairs. Yeah.
I just have a question to pose. Do you guys feel that once a female is successful in the political realm, I'm referring more outside of the U.S., do you think she's more the female population is more likely to criticize her for what she is not able to do within the patriarchal system?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of Latin America, what I've seen is if a woman has based her platform on fulfilling more feminine concerns like healthcare, education, things like that, if once she gets to office and we're in a place where she can actually make a change in those fields, if she doesn't make significant changes in those fields, she's criticized as not having lived up to her more feminine responsibility to take care of.
Criticized more by the female population?
Oh.
Like, I was just wondering if females would tend to be more critical of a female in
Oh, a
position.
female by females. I don't know the breakdown of that.
Well, I guess it probably is to some extent true, but I don't know to what extent. For example, African American friends of mine tell me that other African Americans are usually their worst enemies, because when somebody becomes successful, he was actually using the analogy of a crab, that you are pulled down. And the same complaint I have heard from women friends as well. Although I think it reflects a particular class point of view, which emphasizes careerism a great deal. A more solidaristic approach, sisterhood in case of feminism, and brother and sisterhood in case of race class-based movements. They would probably emphasize the social, political, ideological factors that hold people back, and then go on to ask what kind of movement you have to build and how in order to overcome those barriers. The barriers certainly do exist. I think you are pointing at something real, and I think we need a separate dialogue really to get there. But maybe in the next class I will spend some time talking about ideology, and I will add that to my list here under the first item, and that's a very good point to have brought up. Let me now quickly try to answer Ryan's question, relating it to the other two also. I think in all three cases there is very little cross-paradigm dialogue. And the reasons are many, but I think one of the moves have been to marginalize and in a sense create academic ghettos for things like feminist theory, queer theory. You have women's studies like black studies or African studies. So you essentially kind of banish them from the major departments of the university. So you are liberal, so you tolerate them, you pay them some salary. They bitch and moan and do things among themselves. But it doesn't have any greater impact outside of their own narrow circle, even within the university. So that's one point. And because academic discourse has become increasingly specialized and limited within a few people, it also doesn't touch the broader masses in society. I think that's something that Michelle was also pointing at. So I think that makes it very difficult for the useful parts of these theories to become widespread subjects for debate, discussion, refinement, and most importantly, application in actual social political movements and of social political lives of the people they are most likely to actually help and galvanize into action. And that, I think, is a problem that needs to be solved. One solution that I'm thinking of myself actually doing is to do something like Zinn. Start writing for the people rather than for the elite academics. And that, I think, is a responsibility that we must carry out. Now, turning to people like Wood. Wood actually was lucky because she was in Canada and not in the US, where there was tremendous repression in the 50s. And people who were left-leaning in anything, from Hollywood all the way to academia, they were fired, very brutally. And in a market system, if you lose your job, say you are 40 years old or 50 years old, what are you going to do? It's a very difficult thing. This is the history that you also can learn from reading Zinn. You don't find it in usual history books. Now, since then, because of the movement of 1960s, the student movement, the anti-war movement, you see more people in the US universities also who at least know about some of these things. But I think US universities are still very anti-Marxist. The name Marx somehow creates a reaction, almost like you have swallowed a bitter pill. And I've always been amazed because if you remove Marx, there is very little social science left. Marx really is a giant. If you read even just 10 pages of him, a true intellectual giant. And if you read his more serious extended pieces like Capital, even Volume 1, you realize that here is an extraordinary mind at work who goes way beyond superficial appearances, who is asking very deep questions about what makes society move, what makes capitalism what it is, what makes it so innovative, and what makes it also break down from time to time, what kind of ideas are produced and why they are produced, in whose interest are they produced and enacted. But of course, Marx didn't think of everything. If you do that, as some people do, that would be just an idolatry, idolizing Marx, which is not a very good thing to do. And there are lots of open issues and questions and problems, including the problem of empire, of capital that Wood addresses. And she is very innovative in her own way. She is defending a classical Marxian position, but she's also extending it at the same time. And she's also criticizing more kind of fanciful constructions by people who also claim to be of the left, but they don't seem to have any visible anti-capitalist program. And I think it is that part of Wood that makes her both formidable and feared, not just by academics, but the establishment. Because academic writing really advances the careers of a few people usually. It doesn't threaten anybody, except a few fragile egos, here and there. But something like Wood's, if it is popularized, actually can galvanize millions and millions of people into action. And it has happened before in the history of the world, and it probably will happen again, although nobody can predict when. So I think there will be much more strenuous opposition to people like Wood. And in fact, there is. In American universities, you can easily get tenured by calling yourself a radical who hates Marx. You don't have to know Marx, because other people don't know Marx either. If you just say you hate Marx, then people will accept the other parts of your critique, which I think is completely hypocritical and ignorant and cowardly. In Europe, even Foucault, who is a great thinker, when he wanted to get a job in Collège de France, very elite job, he declared himself also to be an anti-Marxist. He didn't have to do that to survive. He did it basically to prosper. And once he had the job that he wanted, then he went back and said, no, we must read Marx again, and we have to pay attention to him. So at least he had that in him, and he was French. So I think this is a very important issue that you are raising. People do debate when they have to, and they will have to debate these issues only when great movements from below develop again, and students like you start asking questions. In the 60s, these American students who basically had a good upbringing, very innocent, upbringing by usually college-educated parents, liberal parents, they were asking all sorts of uncomfortable questions that their professors had never thought of. And their training didn't give them any language to even handle those things. For example, why are we in Vietnam? What are we doing there? And why is this thing going on? And professors really didn't have any answers. And even here, my colleague John McHammond, who studied Latin America, he was trained in very usual kind of American political science language. And that's the language that is largely spoken and taught here too, which is really, you are learning something, but you're also learning to avoid asking really difficult questions that will really make people who are defending American foreign policy in particular, in Latin America and other places, very edgy. And what happened to my colleague John McCammon was that he went to Guatemala and he saw the repression himself, and that raised some questions in his mind. B, he had students from Latin America, and they started teaching him. They started telling him what really was going on, how the language that he had learned in graduate school was completely obfuscating and inadequate, and on top of that, they are teaching students a pack of lies and half-truths. And it was really from his students that he learned how to be a true social scientist. But not every academic is like John McConnell. They have large egos. They have a lot of things vested. They'll probably lose their perches, their privileges, their promotions, and travel money and whatnot. So it's not going to be easy. I think it has to be challenged from below. That's the real answer to your question. Okay.
Did Wood galvanize any sort of movement or?
Well, in Canada, people really respect our Canada.
That you put forth in the chapter. The alternate definition of development is really creating the ability for people to live a life as they choose, a free life. And then the alternative definition of democracy is that of free democracy,
And what happens to academics, I'm no exception really. To survive you have to write things in a certain way. And in some ways I consider all my academic writing a kind of parody. Maybe it's too subtle a parody for people who take it too seriously. But it was, I have always had this streak in myself. I really, maybe I should respect these people more, or show them kind of a pretense of respect, but I'm not into pretenses. Because from my childhood I could see that adults were really hypocritical and shallow, and in academic life I found that to be even more true. Not that there are not really deep and committed academics like Zin, but they are really exceptions. I have always tried to mock academia whenever I could. Before my dissertation and comprehensive exam, I have to confess I was pretty well prepared, I was sure. But I said, why should I just go through this show of preparing and being so much in awe of these people? So I should go out, get drunk with my friends, and sing. And that's what we did. And I gave kind of an impromptu concert in this hippie cafe for my friends, and sang most of the night. And in the morning I had my exam, so I went and took my exam. But I think the way that we try to make people docile, I think this is a very, very important point. And part of the function of most of the institutions in society is to make us obedient and docile, and take the seeds of revolt out, or sink them so far below that nothing will ever grow out of them. And that is something that we have to go against, even as we try to survive. We are all survivors, otherwise I won't be here and you won't be here. But there is more than just surviving. There is also fighting. And the question is, how do we fight? What do we fight for? And each one of us has to find our own answers to those questions.
I try to find the answers to those questions, though, in some of these readings, and I'm having a hard time reconciling the theoretical and the grassroots, really practical fight.
There is that issue, and I think Micheline tries to do a good job by discussing the history of struggles, and then she's not really as theoretical. She has 6 controversies at the beginning, although she was writing her book partly with an eye to be recognized by academics. But I think she also wants to do more, and that's a part about her that I admire. And I want to, of course, do more. My work is kind of dichotomous. Part of my work is really for the elite among the academics who are thoughtful, and other part is for the folks, which is not really which has nothing to do with academics. I write op-eds and lots of leaflets when I take part in movements because I can write quickly and including things quickly when you are building a movement. Yeah.
Ursula, are you saying that you're not seeing material that's like from a grassroots perspective? You're seeing material more from a theoretical framing perspective? So there's no like
Connection. The connection is
Roots.
tenuous, I think. Yeah, it is true. I mean, that's the point that Brett was making about Gould.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just not even material, but in my own instincts for movement and that fight instinct, to fight for some of the things that we're reading about. And I'm listening to Brett and I'm trying to understand how he's describing, injecting it into your daily life, into your interactions with people, and I see that more as a practical way of
Well, Zinn
applying
is
these
most relevant
theories.
there, I think, of the things that we're reading. Zinn is the most relevant. Well, if you read my essay on Nazrul carefully, you'll see that Nazrul's life was very much one of struggle in many ways. I mean, he was a genius. He was a much deeper and greater person than anyone in this room. But he was engaged, and he made his writing a weapon in this engagement. And we all can do that at various levels, in various ways. But theory is important too. The question is how do you write theory? I think that is the question we have to raise. Even Marx wrote very dense theory, which is not immediately applicable. So we have, this is also a function of the division of labor that has developed between mental and manual labor, fundamentally. So I once proposed to our dean that we should actually make a rule that the faculty will have to volunteer and do some manual labor every week. Doing something. His jaw fell off, but I thought the idea was worth putting to him. Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just to kind of elaborate further on that, do you find that a lot of academic work spends a lot of time framing these issues rather than consulting the reader and trying to inspire the reader to go out and fight? Because I find that a lot of the reading is spending a lot of time, which is very good to have this retrospective and this whatever. It's a spectrum and it's a continuum, but yet there's no reaching hand to say, it'd be really great if American society or if this and that. And so I find for me it's kind of like it's kind of leaves you at the end of the bridge with the big cliff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, yeah, I guess you have to jump. There is that Latin saying that Marx goes, hic rodus, hic salta. Here is roads, here jump.
Right. But more so, I mean
that's what you
analogy,
should take home from this course.
There's no actually, I feel like, and I could be wrong because this is very subjective, but there's actually no academic work on grassroots movements, why they work, how they work, what we can do, and it's a little disappointing.
Yeah, actually there is one book on social movements written by a black person, I don't remember his name. It was his dissertation. It's a very good book on actual movements. I suppose the real way to learn about movements is really to participate in one and build one. And then in the process start reading about other movements. And they are not in academic departments of international relations, certainly. In sociology there may be some. In good sociology departments, I'm sure there are some. Okay, I don't want to forget the last pair, so let's go to them now. We'll come back to your question if we have time or next time. Yeah.
Me? Oh. I did my presentation on Professor Gham's paper on governance, African debt, and sustainable development. And basically, I was able to get more out of the paper because of the presentation, and I saw the leak from one of the NGOs that deal with microfinance. And so because the paper touched on partnership with the poor and capabilities, social capabilities, and just restructuring our approach and the growing significance of the continent of Africa and how we can't basically ignore it strategically anymore, I was able to really get more out of the paper by learning more about microfinance. I didn't really have a real familiar understanding of microfinance. I'd heard of it before I'd heard the presentation, and just hearing about it and being able to really link it to the paper really got me thinking of Mr. Eunice's idea of credit as a human right, because that wasn't even something I'd heard him propose before I'd read the paper and seen the presentation. But even I was able to come to that conclusion after being exposed to the paper and what microfinance was after the fact. So that's what I really got out of the paper.
That's wonderful that you would make connection between what we are doing here and something that happened out there and human rights. Well, that's great. I'm really inspired by what you just said.
No, I'm inspired by the paper. It was great for just to be able to connect it like that. It was very helpful.
Other comments or reactions? Okay, let's go to Kate.
Okay.
Last but not the least.
If you remember, I talked, I think, the last. So I won't go over the theory too much more deeply since I struggled with it myself. I don't know if everyone else did or not. But I talked about, it was chapter 7, you weren't here, I think, of technology, democracy, and global justice.
Maybe you could relate it to your paper on Buddhism and consumption.
Why? I haven't thought about it that, I guess, as deeply as I should.
People who have false self, according to Winnicott, actually need a lot of goodies, to dump there in their black hole.
So my paper, if you read this chapter, was on introducing technology into developing worlds and the developed world, and how deep democracy is necessary in order to for the people to have some say in it, in order for it to actually work, the technology. So what I got out of it myself, I haven't connected it with my Buddhism paper, but I should think about that. That would be interesting. So, but I mainly got out of it was my own perspective on it. Like, I want to get into NGO work. How do I feel about, I connected to that, how do I feel about going to these countries and, telling them supposedly what they should do, when really that's not the way to go about it. We need to go there and talk to the people. And a lot of it, most NGO, they do that, but a lot don't. So that's how I connected
It has actually created a professional existential problem, question for you.
For me, yeah. Especially with I'm working for a microfinance right now, and I'm starting to try to decide where I fall with it. I don't know yet, and I need to think about it.
But it is not a bad thing. I think when you ask those deep questions about yourself, your life, your past, present, and future,